When we picture a medieval king, the image is often grand and heroic. A crowned ruler seated on a golden throne, dispensing justice, leading armies, and protecting his people beneath banners fluttering in the wind. Chronicles praise kings as divinely chosen guardians of order, and legends celebrate their bravery and wisdom. Yet behind this carefully crafted image lay a far darker reality. Medieval kingship was not only about honour and glory, it was built on fear, violence, betrayal, and relentless struggle. To wear a crown in the Middle Ages was to walk a narrow path where power was fragile, morality was flexible, and survival often demanded cruelty. Medieval kings ruled by the doctrine of divine right, the belief that their authority came directly from God. This idea placed the king above ordinary law and criticism. To challenge a king was not merely treason, it was heresy. Yet this divine image masked a brutal truth. A king's power ultimately rested on force. Armies, knights, mercenaries, and fortified castles upheld royal authority far more effectively than holy blessings. When rebellions erupted, kings responded with terrifying efficiency. Villages suspected of aiding rebels were burned, crops destroyed, and entire populations displaced or slaughtered. Punishments were deliberately public and severe. Hangings, beheadings, and mutilations served as warnings to all who might question royal authority. Kings did not rule by love, they ruled by fear, because fear was reliable. No medieval king ever ruled alone, and that dependence was dangerous. Power was shared, uneasily, with nobles, bishops, and military leaders, each with their own ambitions. Loyalty in the Middle Ages was fragile and often temporary. Alliances shifted rapidly, and today's trusted advisor could become tomorrow's assassin. Court life was a battlefield without swords. Whispered rumours, forged letters, secret meetings, and sudden accusations were weapons as lethal as any blade. Kings lived surrounded by people who smiled in public while plotting in private. Many slept lightly, aware that poison in a goblet or a dagger in the night could end their reign instantly. Paranoia was not a weakness, it was a survival instinct. Kingship was inherited, not earned. This meant that crowns often passed to children, the mentally unstable, or the dangerously incompetent. A weak king could plunge an entire kingdom into chaos. Civil wars erupted when rival claimants contested succession, and these wars were often more destructive than foreign invasions. The dark irony of medieval kingship is that the most ruthless rulers were often the most successful. Mercy could be interpreted as weakness, and weakness invited rebellion. Many kings learned quickly that survival demanded brutality. Compassion was a luxury few could afford. Medieval justice was neither fair nor consistent. It was political. Kings used law as a weapon to eliminate enemies and reward allies. Trials were frequently sham proceedings, with outcomes decided long before evidence was presented. Accusations of treason required little proof, and conviction often meant death and the confiscation of property. Public executions were theatrical displays of royal power. Crowds gathered to watch traitors dismembered, burned, or broken on wheels. These spectacles were not simply punishments, they were propaganda. The message was clear: defy the king and suffer unimaginably. For medieval kings, war was not an exception, it was the norm. Kings were expected to be warriors, and peace was often viewed as a sign of weakness. Wars were launched for land, titles, marriages, or personal pride, with little regard for civilian suffering. Entire regions were devastated by marching armies. Crops were destroyed, livestock stolen, and towns looted. Starvation and disease followed in war's wake, killing far more people than battles themselves. Yet kings rarely witnessed this suffering firsthand. They planned wars from castles, while peasants paid the price in blood and hunger. Maintaining armies, courts, and fortifications required enormous wealth. Kings extracted this wealth relentlessly from their subjects through taxes, forced labour, and seizures of land. Peasants were crushed under financial burdens they could not escape, often working simply to survive. Failure to pay taxes could lead to imprisonment, torture, or death. Rebellions against taxation were brutally suppressed. Kings viewed their subjects less as people and more as resources, bodies to farm the land, fight wars, and fill coffers. Though kings claimed divine approval, their relationship with the church was often tense and manipulative. Kings used religion to justify wars and suppress dissent, while church leaders sought political influence in return. When the two clashed, the consequences were devastating. Kings who defied the church could face excommunication, a spiritual weapon that turned subjects against their ruler. In response, some kings imprisoned or executed clergy, seized church lands, or installed loyal religious figures. Faith, like law, became a tool of power. Royal marriages were rarely about love. Queens were political assets, traded to secure alliances and peace treaties. Many lived lives of isolation, trapped in hostile courts or used as hostages. Some queens were imprisoned or executed when they became inconvenient. Kings were rarely faithful, producing illegitimate heirs who complicated succession and fueled conflict. Royal families were often nests of rivalry, jealousy, and betrayal, where even children were potential threats to power. Some medieval kings gained infamous reputations for cruelty. Torture, mass executions, and scorched earth tactics were used without hesitation. These rulers are often remembered as monsters, yet their brutality was not random. It was calculated. In a world without stable institutions, cruelty was a method of governance. Fear kept nobles obedient, peasants compliant, and enemies cautious. A king who hesitated risked destruction. Behind the violence lay a deeply human cost. Kings lived under constant stress, haunted by the fear of rebellion, invasion, and assassination. Many suffered from paranoia, insomnia, and emotional instability. The crown was heavy, not only in gold, but in terror. Some kings became increasingly isolated, trusting no one. Others descended into madness or cruelty as pressure mounted. Medieval kingship was a lonely existence, where power came at the price of peace. Despite its horrors, medieval kingship shaped modern political systems. Concepts of sovereignty, law, and governance emerged from this brutal era. Yet, the dark side of kingship serves as a reminder that absolute power, unchecked by accountability, almost inevitably leads to abuse. The medieval crown was not a symbol of glory alone. It was a symbol of fear, blood, and sacrifice. Behind the pageantry lay a grim reality. Kings ruled not because they were chosen, but because they survived. The dark side of medieval kingship reveals a world where power was unstable, morality was secondary, and survival demanded ruthlessness. Kings were not simply villains or heroes. They were products of a violent system that rewarded cruelty and punished weakness. To rule in the Middle Ages was to stand atop a mountain of suffering, always one step away from falling into oblivion. The crown promised glory, but it delivered fear. And for many medieval kings, the throne was not a prize, it was a curse.